I want to start with something simple. You woke up this morning. I know that sounds like a small thing. Maybe it even sounds like a strange thing to point out. But stay with me for a second, because that fact, that simple, quiet fact, means something that I think gets overlooked more than it should. It means you're still here. And as long as you're still here, the story has not ended. Whatever you may be feeling right now, tired, uncertain, like the most meaningful parts of your life are somehow behind you, I want to gently but directly challenge that idea. You are not finished. And I want to tell you that I love bringing you these stories. Please hit like and subscribe so I can bring you even more. It would mean so much. Now, I want to tell you about a man named George. George was 77 years old, living alone in the same house he'd raised 4 children in. His wife had passed 3 years before. His health was decent, nothing catastrophic, but enough small things accumulating that he'd started thinking of himself as someone in decline, someone winding down. He stopped making plans, not dramatically, just quietly. The way you stop setting a second place at the table. The way you start thinking in terms of what you have left rather than what you might still do. His daughter noticed it before he did. She called him one Sunday and asked him a question that caught him completely off guard. She said, "Dad, what's something you always wanted to do that you never did?" George was quiet for a long time, and then he said, almost embarrassed, "I always wanted to learn how to paint landscapes. I don't know why, I just always thought they were beautiful." His daughter sent him a beginner's paint set the following week. Nothing fancy, just the basics. George left it in the box for a month.
And then, one rainy Tuesday, with nothing else going on, he opened it. He was not good, he said so himself. The first few attempts looked, in his words, like something a well-meaning child had produced on a bad day. But he kept going. Not because he had any ambition around it, not because he thought he'd become something, but because for the first time in a long time, he was inside an hour that belonged completely to him. At 79, George had a small showing of his work at his local library. 12 paintings on the wall of the reading room for 3 weeks in November. He stood there on opening night, surrounded by neighbors and grandchildren and people he barely knew, looking at something he had made, something that had not existed in the world before he put it there. And he said he felt in that moment more fully alive than he had in years. Not because of the attention, not because anyone called him an artist, but because he had refused, even quietly, even imperfectly, to stop becoming. Here's what I want you to hear in that story, because it's easy to listen to something like that and think, that's a nice story, but that's not me. Maybe you don't want to paint. Maybe your hands don't allow for it, or that particular thing has never called to you. That's fine. That's not the point. The point is what George did before the paint set. The point is what his daughter's question unlocked. She asked him what he'd always wanted that he'd never had, and he had an answer. You have an answer too. I'd be willing to bet on it. Somewhere underneath the routine, underneath the limitations you've accepted, underneath the quiet resignation that can settle over a life when the world stops asking much of you, there is something, a place, a skill, a conversation you've never had, a person you've been meaning to call for 2 years, a version of your days that looks slightly different than the one you're currently living. That's not fantasy, that's just unfinished business. You don't have to reinvent yourself. I want to be clear about that, because sometimes this kind of message can feel like pressure, like you're supposed to suddenly become someone new, someone busy and purposeful and impressive. And that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking something much smaller. I'm asking you to stay open, to stay even slightly curious about what might still be possible, to resist the very human tendency, especially in later life, to close the book on yourself before the last chapter has been written. Because here's the quiet truth about the people who seem to thrive in their 70s and 80s, and there are more of them than you might think. They're not extraordinary people. They didn't have easier lives or better circumstances. They just never fully agreed with the idea that they were done. They kept one small door open, and eventually something walked through it. George is 81 now. He paints 3 mornings a week. His granddaughter, who is 14, started painting with him on Saturday mornings. She's already better than he is, he says. He couldn't be more proud. He told his daughter recently that he thinks about those years after his wife died, those years when he'd quietly stopped expecting anything, and he said, "I almost missed it. I almost just waited it out." Don't wait it out. You have lived long enough to know that life doesn't ask permission before it changes. It didn't ask when you were young, and it won't ask now. Things will shift whether you're ready or not, but within that, within all the uncertainty and the limitation and the grief that comes with having lived a full and complicated life, there is still room, still space, still a version of your days that is a little more alive than the one you're settling for. You woke up this morning. That means today still belongs to you. What you do with it, even one small piece of it, is still entirely up to you. You are not finished, not even close.